She nursed a cowboy back to health, unaware he was the millionaire behind the town's only hospital. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. I arrived at Grant's private suite on the top floor of the hospital, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on my shoulders. As I walked inside, the soft hum of the medical equipment filled the air, almost like a constant reminder of the fragility of life. The room was immaculate, with its plush dark oak furniture and soft, ambient lighting, but it felt eerily quiet. At the center of it all lay Grant Carter, his strong frame now reduced to a shell, hooked up to various life-sustaining machines. I approached his bed slowly, my heart racing in my chest. I had never taken care of someone as important as him. Not that I had any idea of how important he was. I had only seen the name in passing, but now I was face to face with the man who owned the town's only hospital, and he didn't even know I existed. It had been 3 days since Grant had opened his eyes. He still wasn't fully conscious, but there was a noticeable difference. The steady rise and fall of his chest, the slow blinking of his eyes, the subtle movements of his fingers, all signs that he was finally coming back to the world. Each day, I would sit beside him, holding his hand, talking to him, trying to reach him, even though I didn't know if he could hear me. The doctors had cautioned me that his recovery might take time, that he might not wake up fully for weeks, but I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of hope. He was fighting, and I was right here beside him, ready to fight too. There was a quiet tension in the air as I entered his room that morning. The faint sound of the heart monitor, the soft whir of the machines, it felt like everything was waiting for something to happen. I walked to his bedside, my footsteps soft on the carpet, and adjusted the floor. As I looked down at Grant, I could see the subtle changes in his features. His jaw had softened, his skin less pale. I hadn't realized how much I had been worrying until I saw how much better he looked. He seemed more alive, more present. He was still weak, still unable to speak, but I could sense that he was fighting to stay with us. I gently took his hand in mine. "Good morning, Grant," I said quietly. "How are you feeling today?" There was no answer, of course. But I had learned to read the small signs, the way his chest rose and fell, the way his hand seemed to tighten around mine, just a little bit more each time. I smiled softly, even though I knew he couldn't see it. "You're getting stronger. I can feel it," I continued. "I'm so proud of you." I sat in the chair next to his bed, keeping my hand gently resting on his. The silence between us was comforting now, no longer uncomfortable. I found myself talking to him about anything and everything, even if I didn't know if he could understand. I told him about the patients I had taken care of over the years, about the hospital gossip, about my favorite books and music. It wasn't much, but it made the long hours easier to bear. As the day passed, I kept my vigil by his side, watching the clock tick away. I didn't know how much time had passed when I noticed something different. His eyes were open again, slightly, but enough to catch my attention. His eyelids fluttered, and for the first time, his gaze seemed to focus on me. I leaned forward, my heart racing. "Grant," I whispered. His eyes met mine, not with the blank stare of someone lost in a coma, but with the flicker of recognition. I held my breath, waiting. "Anna," he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely audible, but it was enough. My heart skipped a beat at the sound of his name, my name. It was a miracle. "You're awake," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. "I'm here, Grant. I've been here the whole time." He blinked, his eyelids still heavy, and I could see the confusion in his eyes. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice raspy. "You're in the hospital," I replied softly. "You've been in a coma for a while. But you're okay now. You're getting better." His brow furrowed as he processed my words. "A coma," he muttered. "How long?" I hesitated, unsure how to explain. "About a month," I said gently. "But you're awake now. You're going to be okay." He seemed to absorb the information slowly, as if it was too much to take in all at once. "I don't remember," his voice trailed off. "It's okay," I said, my voice soft and reassuring. "You don't have to remember everything right now. You've been through a lot." I squeezed his hand, watching as his eyes shifted, trying to focus on my face. "Who are you?" he asked quietly, his voice full of confusion. I blinked, caught off guard by his question. "I'm Anna," I said gently. "I'm your nurse. I've been taking care of you." There was a long pause as he processed that, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't seem to recognize me, but I didn't take it personally. It was natural. He had been through a traumatic experience, and his memory was still clouded. I could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to piece everything together. "I don't remember you," he murmured. "But you've been here?" I nodded. "Every day? I've been here, talking to you, helping you get better." His gaze softened slightly. "Thank you," he whispered. I felt my heart swell in my chest at his words. "Of course," I said, my voice gentle. "You're important to me, Grant. I wouldn't leave you." He closed his eyes briefly, as if overwhelmed by the flood of emotions and thoughts racing through his mind. "I'm sorry," he whispered after a moment. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to apologize," I replied softly. "We'll take it one step at a time." There was a long, quiet moment between us, and I could feel the bond growing stronger. I didn't know if Grant remembered me yet, or if he would ever fully recognize everything I had done for him, but in that moment, it didn't matter. He was awake, he was here, and I was going to help him get through this. I would be there for him every step of the way. It had been a week since Grant had awoken, and every day, I watched as he slowly began to regain pieces of himself. His eyes had lost that distant, clouded look, replaced by a sharper focus that seemed to see more of the world around him. He could speak now, though his voice was still weak and strained. I could see the effort it took for him to form words, but I didn't mind. The fact that he was awake and starting to recover was more than I could have asked for. That morning, I arrived at his room as usual, my heart lifting slightly when I saw that he was already awake. He was sitting up in bed, his gaze fixed out the window. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows on his face. It was the first time I had seen him awake so early. "Morning," I greeted him softly, walking in to check his vitals. He turned his head toward me, offering a small smile, though it was faint. "Good morning," he replied, his voice hoarse but stronger. "How did you sleep?" I asked, moving to adjust his pillow. He shifted slightly in his bed, still not fully used to the movement. "Not too bad," he said, pausing as if thinking. "I keep dreaming. Weird dreams. Some of them feel real, like they happened." I looked at him, intrigued. "What kind of dreams?" He glanced at me, his expression unreadable for a moment. "I don't know. They're blurry, but I remember flashes. Faces, places. It's like there's a whole world I can't quite reach." I nodded. "It's okay. The brain does funny things when it's healing. It's normal to have dreams and memories come and go. You've been through a lot, Grant." He didn't respond right away, his eyes narrowing as if trying to recall something. "Do you remember anything from before?" I asked cautiously, though I wasn't sure if he would be ready to confront the past just yet. His eyes seemed to cloud for a moment. "I remember bits and pieces," he said slowly. "I know my name. I know I was someone. But it's all fragmented. Like a puzzle I can't put together. It'll come back to you," I reassured him. "Your brain just needs time." He nodded, but I could see the frustration in his eyes. He didn't like the idea of being a puzzle. He had always been the man in control, the one who built his empire with his own hands. Now, he was at the mercy of time and recovery. I couldn't imagine how that must feel, but I also knew that he was fighting. Every day, every small step he took was proof of that. As I went through my usual routine, checking his vitals and adjusting his medication, I noticed a change in him. He was more engaged, more present. He started asking more questions about the world, about what had happened while he was unconscious. At first, he had only asked about the immediate things, how long he had been in the hospital, who had been visiting him. But now, he was asking more personal questions, trying to understand what had happened to him, what he had lost. One afternoon, as I was helping him with a glass of water, he asked, "What happened to my company? Carter Enterprises. Is it still running?" I paused for a moment. "Yes," I said carefully. "Your company is still running, Grant. It's been operating without you, but it's still standing. Your family has been handling things in your absence." He looked thoughtful, but there was something in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. "My family," he repeated, as if tasting the word on his tongue. "I don't remember much about them. Did they visit?" I hesitated. "Your family, has been distant. They've mostly left the hospital visits to the staff. I've been the one here, taking care of you." but they've made arrangements to manage the company. He didn't seem satisfied with my answer, but he didn't press further. I could see the deepening conflict in his eyes, the tension between his desire to reconnect with the people who were supposed to be his family and the frustration that came with not remembering them. He had been the kind of man who ruled his world with an iron fist, but now, in this vulnerable state, he was forced to rely on others. I could only imagine how difficult it must be for him. Later that evening, when I was sitting by his bed, reading through some files, I heard him speak again. "Anna," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you doing this? Taking care of me, I mean." I looked up at him, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," he said quietly. "I've been in a coma for so long. You don't owe me anything. You don't even know me." I felt a tightness in my chest at his words. "Grant, it's my job to take care of you," I said gently. "But it's more than that. I believe in you. You're not just the billionaire who built an empire. You're a person, and I'm here to help you get back to being that person." He seemed to take a moment to absorb my words, and when he looked at me again, there was a softness in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice hoarse but sincere. "You're the first person to say that to me." I smiled softly, not knowing how to respond to such raw honesty. It wasn't easy to take care of someone like Grant, someone who had everything and yet nothing at all. But I was learning that there was more to him than just the man in the headlines, more than the CEO who everyone feared. There was a person behind all of that, a person who was trying to find his way back, and I would help him find it, no matter how long it took. The days that followed Grant's awakening were filled with small triumphs and setbacks. He was slowly gaining strength, but the road to full recovery was long and filled with obstacles. It was hard to watch him struggle with his memory, as if his mind was a tangled web of forgotten pieces. Each day, he remembered a little more, but there was still so much he didn't know. His company, his family, his past, everything felt distant, like a dream fading with the morning light. I could see the frustration in his eyes every time he asked a question about his life before the accident, only to receive vague answers. His family hadn't visited much, only sending brief, impersonal updates about the company. The distance between them was growing, and I wasn't sure if he was aware of it yet. But I could tell he was becoming more and more restless, more determined to regain control of his life. It wasn't just about getting better physically anymore. He wanted answers. One afternoon, as I was adjusting his drip and checking his vitals, he finally spoke up. "Anna," he said, his voice hoarse but firm. "I need to know what's really going on. Why haven't they come to see me? Why haven't they told me the truth?" I paused, my heart skipping a beat. I had been dreading this moment. Grant had always been a man who prided himself on being in control, and now that control was slipping away. "Grant, I don't know why your family hasn't been around much," I said softly, trying to choose my words carefully. "But what I do know is that they've been focused on the business. It's been difficult for them, and they've left most of the decisions to the staff here." He furrowed his brow, clearly unsatisfied with my answer. "So they've just abandoned me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Like I'm nothing?" I shook my head, my heart aching for him. "No, Grant. I don't think they've abandoned you. But they've been dealing with their own things. And they're not the ones here with you. I am." There was a long silence between us as he processed my words. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the deep ache of abandonment. But I also saw something else, determination. "I need to get out of here," he said finally, his voice filled with resolve. "I need to get back to my life. I need to find out what happened to everything I built." I looked at him, my heart heavy with concern. "Grant, you're not ready for that yet. You need time to heal. You can't rush this." He shook his head stubbornly. "I've wasted enough time already. I'm not going to sit here and let my company fall apart because I'm stuck in a hospital bed. I need to get back to work." His words were sharp, filled with the same intensity one had seen in him before the accident, the intensity that had made him a successful businessman. But now it was directed at something more personal, his own recovery, his own survival. I knew he was in pain, but I couldn't let him make a rash decision. "Grant," I said gently, taking his hand in mine, "I understand how much your company means to you, but your health has to come first. You can't pour all your energy into the business if you're not strong enough to stand on your own 2 feet. You need to heal." He met my gaze, his eyes searching mine as if trying to decide if he could trust me. "And what if I don't? What if I'm too late to fix everything?" he asked quietly. What if everything falls apart because I'm not there to fix it? I squeezed his hand, trying to offer him some comfort. Grant, there's still time. But you have to take care of yourself first. You can't fix everything at once. Let things come one step at a time. He looked at me for a long moment, and then, to my surprise, he nodded. I'll try, he said softly. But I don't know how long I can wait. I smiled, relieved that he was willing to listen. One day at a time, I reminded him. That's all we can do. Over the next few days, Grant's progress continued at a steady pace. He was starting to walk again, albeit with a little help, and his physical strength was returning. But emotionally, it was clear he was still grappling with his past. He would often ask me questions about his company, about his family, about everything he had lost. And each time, I would gently guide him back to the present, to the recovery that was still ongoing. But I could see the toll it was taking on him. One night, after I had finished my shift, I stayed with him a little longer than usual. The hospital was quieter now, the hustle and bustle of the day replaced by a calm stillness. I was sitting by his side, reading through some paperwork, when he spoke again. Anna, he said, his voice low and hesitant. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not. I looked up at him, my heart aching for him. Grant, I said softly, you don't have to pretend. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel lost. He glanced at me, his expression softening. I never thought I'd be the one needing help, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. I've always been the one people came to, the one with all the answers. But now, I don't even know who I am anymore. I stood up and moved to his side, taking his hand in mine once more. You're still you, Grant. I said gently. You're just figuring out who you are now. And that's okay. There was a long silence between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke of understanding, of shared moments. He squeezed my hand and smiled faintly. Thank you, he whispered. For everything. I smiled back at him, my heart swelling with emotion. You don't need to thank me, I said quietly. I'm here for you. And I always will be. Grant's recovery was a slow process, but every day, it felt like he was gaining a little more ground. His body had started to heal faster than we expected, but the mental part was still a struggle. Each time he remembered something, it was like watching him unlock a door to a world he could no longer fully grasp. I knew it wasn't easy for him. The man who had once been in charge of everything, the CEO who ran his empire with precision, was now struggling to piece together the parts of his own life. But he was trying, and that's all that mattered. We'd spent the last few weeks in this routine. He would wake up each day, sometimes with more clarity, sometimes still groggy from the fog of his memory loss. He had been eager to get back to work, but I could see how hard it was for him to even get out of bed without feeling exhausted. Despite his setbacks, there was something in his eyes that told me he was determined to get back to his old life. He had mentioned Carter Enterprises multiple times, asking questions about the state of the business, about the board of directors, about everything he'd built. It was clear that his mind was still racing ahead, even if his body was behind. One afternoon, after finishing his physical therapy session, he seemed more frustrated than usual. He had been trying to walk on his own, but his legs were still weak, and his balance was off. He was slowly making progress, but it wasn't fast enough for him. I can't do this, he muttered under his breath, his voice rough from exertion. I saw the strain in his face as he tried to push himself further. Grant, you're doing great, I said, my voice calm but firm. You're taking it one step at a time, and that's all you can do right now. He looked at me, the frustration in his eyes giving way to something else, vulnerability. For a moment, I could see the man behind the walls he had built for so long. I don't know if I can wait any longer, he said quietly. I'm not the same person I was before all of this. I can't keep pretending like I don't care about my company, my life. Everything's slipping away, and I don't know how to stop it. My heart ached for him. He had always been the one who had everything under control, who had all the answers. But now, in his weakened state, he was facing the one thing he couldn't control, his own recovery. Grant, you're not alone in this, I said, stepping closer to him. You don't have to do this by yourself. And you're not losing everything. It may feel like that, but you're here, you're fighting, and that's what matters. He didn't respond at first, just sat there, looking at the ground. The silence stretched between us, thick with unsaid words. I knew he was processing everything, trying to figure out what it meant to come back from something like this. His world had been shattered, and now he was trying to rebuild it piece by piece. After a long pause, he looked up at me, his eyes soft. "I don't know what I would do without you, Anna," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had always been just his nurse, just someone doing her job. But somehow, over the weeks, I had become something more to him, something important. "You don't have to worry about that," I said gently. "I'm here for you, Grant. I'll always be here." He nodded slowly, the weight of the words settling in between us. It was the first time I had heard him admit that he needed someone. And I knew, deep down, that this was the beginning of something bigger than either of us expected. The next few days were a blur of therapy sessions and late-night talks. I continued to help him with his recovery, but it was clear he was reaching a tipping point. He was still so desperate to get back to his life, to regain control of everything he had lost, and I could see it eating away at him. One evening, I sat with him in his room, watching the sunset through the window. He was quiet, staring out at the view, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Anna," he said, breaking the silence, "do you ever wonder if I'll ever be the same again? Will I ever be the person I was before the accident?" I didn't hesitate in my response. "No, you won't be exactly the same. But that doesn't mean you can't be someone just as strong. Maybe even stronger. You've already proven that, Grant. You're still here. You're still fighting." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to understand what I meant. "I don't feel strong," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I feel weak, like I'm losing everything." I took his hand, gently squeezing it. "That's okay. You don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to feel lost. What matters is that you're not giving up. You're still here, and that's something worth fighting for." For a moment, he said nothing, just looked at me with those tired eyes. But then, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I think I'm starting to understand that," he said quietly. "Thank you, Anna, for everything." My heart swelled at his words. "You don't have to thank me, Grant," I said softly. "I'm just doing what anyone would do. What you need is time, and I'll be here every step of the way. One day at a time, remember?" He nodded, the smile on his face growing a little more genuine. "One day at a time," he repeated. And in that moment, I knew he was starting to accept the truth, that recovery was a process, not something to rush through. He didn't have to fix everything all at once. And neither did I. It had been several weeks since Grant started showing signs of progress. His physical recovery was steady, though not without its challenges. He still walked with a slight limp and his stamina wasn't where it used to be, but he was determined to push himself further each day. What worried me more was his emotional state. As he regained strength physically, the weight of his past seemed to settle more heavily on him. He had started asking deeper questions about his life, about his family, his company, and his own choices before the accident. He was becoming increasingly frustrated with his inability to remember large chunks of his life, especially the parts that had defined him. He was no longer content with simply sitting back and waiting. One evening, after his physical therapy, Grant sat in his chair by the window, staring out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across his room. I could tell he was deep in thought. "Anna," he said softly, breaking the silence, his voice low and rough. "What do you think happened to me? To us?" I walked over to him, sitting down beside him. The question hung in the air between us. I knew exactly what he was asking. He wanted to know how everything had gotten so out of his control. I didn't have all the answers. I wasn't even sure he was ready to hear them. "I think," I started, choosing my words carefully, "that you've been through something incredibly difficult, and it's going to take time to sort through it all. But you're not alone in this, Grant. You have people who care about you, even if they're not here every day. They're still around, even if they don't know how to help." He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with a mix of frustration and confusion. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "My family, they barely visit. And the company, what happened to it? What am I supposed to do with all of this? I can't remember anything, but I know it matters. I built it all and now, I don't even know where to start." I sighed softly, feeling the weight of his words. "Grant," I said gently, "you don't have to have all the answers right now. You don't have to fix everything at once. The important thing is that you're here. You're fighting. That's the first step." He closed his eyes for a moment, and I could see the deep internal battle taking place inside him. He was used to being the one who fixed everything, the one who had all the answers. But now, he was facing something far bigger than any business deal or challenge he had ever encountered. This was his own life, and it was beyond his control. I wanted to reach out and comfort him, but I also knew that this was something he had to face on his own. It wasn't something I could fix for him. I don't know if I can be that man again, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. I've always been the one in control, the one with the plan. But now, it feels like everything's slipping through my fingers. The company, my family. I'm just a shadow of who I used to be. I placed my hand gently on his. You're not a shadow, Grant. You're still you. You just don't remember all of it yet. But that doesn't change who you are. You're still capable. You still have the strength inside you. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine as if trying to find the truth in my words. You really think I can come back from this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. I do. But it won't happen overnight. It's going to take time, patience, and a lot of work. And you're not alone. You have people who want to help you. He turned his gaze back out the window, his eyes distant once more. I don't know if I can trust anyone right now, he said quietly. I don't know who's really on my side anymore. I didn't press him further. I knew the trust issues were one of the hardest things he had to deal with. When you've built an empire, it's hard to trust anyone, especially when everything you've built is now in jeopardy. The next few days were quieter. Grant spent most of his time resting, trying to regain his strength. I continued with his care, helping him with his physical therapy and offering words of encouragement when I could. But I could tell he was still struggling. One night, after I had finished my shift, I stayed behind for a while, sitting in the chair beside his bed. The room was dim, and the only sound was the soft hum of the machines. I had become accustomed to this quiet, but tonight it felt different. Grant's eyes were closed, but I could tell he wasn't asleep. After a few moments, he spoke again. Anna, he said, his voice barely audible. Do you think I've lost everything? I turned to face him, my heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. No, Grant. You haven't lost everything, I said, my voice soft but steady. You still have your life. You still have the chance to rebuild. And you're not alone. You have me. He turned his head slightly toward me, his eyes filled with a sadness I hadn't seen before. I don't know how to rebuild, he admitted, the words coming out in a whisper. I don't even know where to start. I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. You start by taking care of yourself, I said. You can't rebuild until you're whole again. One step at a time, Grant. That's how we'll do it. One day at a time. There was a long silence, but this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. Grant's breathing had slowed, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed to relax. He closed his eyes, his hand still resting in mine. I stayed by his side, knowing that this was the beginning of something new for both of us. He had a long road ahead of him, but I would be here every step of the way. And together, we would figure it out. The weeks that followed were filled with steady progress, but Grant's recovery was far from linear. There were days when he seemed to be getting stronger, his energy returning, and his memory slowly piecing itself back together. And then there were days when it all felt too much for him. On those days, I could see the frustration in his eyes, the same eyes that had once been filled with determination, now clouded with doubt. I stayed by his side, always reminding him to take things one day at a time. Slowly, he began to let go of some of the control he had once clung to. He still didn't trust many people, especially when it came to his family. But he was starting to open up to me, more than he ever had before. It was a quiet evening when I saw the shift in him. The hospital was almost empty, the quiet hum of machines the only sound filling the air. Grant was sitting in his favorite chair by the window, looking out at the darkening sky. The setting sun had turned the sky into shades of orange and purple, casting a peaceful light in the room. I walked in quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment. He didn't notice me at first, his focus entirely on the world outside. You know, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. I used to love watching sunsets like this. Before everything, before the accident. I smiled softly, moving closer to him. I remember you telling me that, I said, sitting beside him. He glanced at me, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I used to think about the future, about all the things I still wanted to do. But now, it feels like I'm just trying to get back to a life that's already passed me by. His voice was quiet, full of the weight of his realization. I felt a pang of sympathy for him. I knew how much he had built, how much he had lost. But I also knew that he had the strength to rebuild, even if it didn't look the same as before. It's not easy, I said softly. But you're still here. You're still fighting. and that counts for something. He turned his gaze back to the window, his expression contemplative. I don't know how to start over, Anna, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know where to begin. The company, my family. I've lost so much. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts before I spoke. Maybe starting over doesn't mean going back to where you were. Maybe it means moving forward from where you are. You've already made it this far, Grant. That's something. He looked at me, as though considering my words. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. But how do I trust again? He asked. How do I trust the people around me when I don't even trust myself? It was a question I had been expecting, but that didn't make it any easier to answer. Trust takes time, I said gently. You don't have to trust everyone right away, and you don't have to trust yourself all the time. But you can start with small steps. You've already made one by opening up to me. That's progress. He was silent for a long moment, as though processing everything I had said. I watched him closely, but I didn't push him. He needed to come to his own conclusions. Finally, he nodded, though it was clear he wasn't completely convinced. I want to believe that, he said quietly. I want to believe I can get back to the person I was. I reached out and placed a hand on his. You're already on your way, I said softly. You don't have to be the same person you were before. You just have to be the best version of yourself, whatever that looks like now. He didn't respond, but I could see something shift in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to believe that he was beginning to understand. The next day, Grant surprised me. He asked to speak with his lawyer and the board of directors over the phone. I had expected him to take things slow, to rest for a little while longer. But there he was, pushing himself again, determined to take control of his future. He didn't mention it to me directly, but I knew it was his way of starting to regain some of the independence he had lost. I stayed out of the conversation, not wanting to intrude, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in him. Even if he wasn't quite ready to step back into the world he had left behind, he was taking the first steps toward doing so. Over the next few weeks, I continued to care for him, always encouraging him when I saw him falter. I knew that he had a long road ahead, but it seemed like he was finally beginning to believe in his own strength again. One afternoon, as I helped him with his physical therapy, he looked at me and smiled. A smile that was more genuine than any I had seen in a long time. Thank you, Anna, he said quietly. I don't think I've ever really thanked you properly. You've been here every step of the way, even when I didn't deserve it. I felt a lump form in my throat. You don't need to thank me, I said softly. I'm just doing my job. But I'm also here because I believe in you, Grant. I always have. His smile widened slightly, and for the first time in a long while, it seemed like he truly believed it too. Grant had come a long way since the first day I had met him, lying unconscious in that hospital bed. His recovery was still a process, but it was no longer as daunting as it once seemed. He had regained more of his strength, both physically and mentally. He was still not the same man who had built an empire, but he was learning to adapt to the new version of himself, one who didn't need to be in control all the time. It wasn't easy for him, but with each passing day, he seemed to be coming to terms with his new reality. His family still kept their distance, but I could see that Grant was learning not to let that affect him as much as it once had. For the first time in weeks, he didn't ask me about the company or his family's absence. Instead, he focused on his own healing, which was a small victory in itself. It was late one afternoon when he finally made a decision. He had been sitting quietly by the window, staring out at the city, as he often did. This time, though, something seemed different in his posture, less tense, more at ease. I watched him for a few moments before walking over. Hey, I said, my voice soft. What's on your mind? He turned to look at me, his eyes clearer than they had been in days. I think it's time, he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Time for what? I asked, unsure of where this conversation was going. Time to take control again, he said. Not of the company, of myself. I've been sitting here, waiting for something to happen, but nothing's going to change unless I make it happen. I felt a wave of emotion flood over me. It was a breakthrough, a moment I had been waiting for. He was finally ready to take responsibility for his own life, not just the business he had built. Grant, that's the first step, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You don't have to do everything at once, but taking that first step is huge. He nodded, his expression softening. I'm not going to rush it, he said, but I need to get back to my life. And I need to start somewhere. I smiled, proud of him for reaching this point. Where will you start? I asked. He looked out the window again, a thoughtful expression on his face. I don't know yet, he admitted. But I know it starts with me. Not with the company. Not with the past. Just me. It was a powerful moment, one I knew would change both of our lives. Over the next few days, Grant began to push himself in ways he hadn't before. He started doing things that were simple but significant, going for short walks around the hospital, reading the news again, asking about other patients and their conditions. It wasn't the same as managing a multi-million-dollar business, but it was his way of regaining control over his own existence. It wasn't always easy for him, though. He still struggled with doubts, especially on the days when his memories were more clouded than others. One afternoon, he asked me, "What if I never remember it all? What if I can't get back to who I was?" I sat beside him, placing a hand gently on his arm. "Grant," I said softly, "who you were is not the same as who you are now. You're still you. You're still strong. And maybe the memories will come back, maybe they won't. But that doesn't change the fact that you're here now, and that's what matters." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, as though looking for a piece of truth to hold on to. "You really believe that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, offering him a reassuring smile. "I do. Because I've seen how hard you're trying. You've already come so far." He didn't speak for a long time after that, but when he did, his voice was quieter, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. "I'm scared, Anna. Scared that I won't be enough. That I won't be the man I used to be." My heart broke at his words, but I stayed calm, steady. "Grant, you are enough. You don't have to be the same person you were before the accident. You just have to be the best version of who you are now. And you're already on your way." He looked at me, his gaze softening. For the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of the old Grant, the one who had once believed in his own power, his own strength. Maybe it was a different version of him, but it was still him. The next day, he made another decision. He asked me to help him write a letter to the board of directors, telling them that he was taking a step back from his role as CEO. It wasn't an easy decision for him, but he had realized that, at least for now, he needed to focus on himself. The company could survive without him for a while longer. It was time for him to rebuild his own life. The letter was simple, but it was a powerful statement. He wasn't giving up. He was just taking a break, taking care of himself so that he could eventually return stronger. I watched as he signed it, his hand steady as he penned the words. "It's a new chapter," he said softly, as he finished the letter. "Not just for the company, but for me too." And in that moment, I knew that Grant was finally learning to accept the new version of his life. It was still a long road ahead, but he wasn't afraid of it anymore. He wasn't running from his past. He was accepting it, learning from it, and ready to move forward. And I would be there, by his side, every step of the way. It had been a few weeks since Grant made the decision to step back from his role as CEO of Carter Enterprises. The letter had been sent, and for the first time in a long time, he seemed at peace with his choice. His physical therapy continued, though he was now able to do much more on his own. His progress had been steady, and while his body was healing, his mind was starting to catch up. I could see him beginning to make plans again, not about the company, but about his life. He would talk about small things, where he wanted to go once he was fully recovered, what kind of life he wanted to build outside of the world he had once controlled. I had watched him evolve from the man who was consumed by his empire to someone who was slowly rediscovering the beauty of life outside of work. He still had a long way to go, but it was clear he was moving forward. That evening, as I walked into his room to check on him after his therapy session, I found him sitting at his desk, a pen in his hand, staring at a piece of paper. The room was dimly lit by the soft glow of a lamp on his desk, and the faint sound of a clock ticking filled the silence. He didn't notice me at first, so I took a moment to just watch him. He seemed lost in thought, his brows furrowed slightly as he looked at the paper. "Grant," I said gently, breaking the silence. He looked up, startled, but then his expression softened when he saw me. "Oh, Anna," he said, putting down the pen. "I didn't hear you come in." I smiled and walked over to him. "What are you working on?" I asked, curious. "I'm just thinking," he said, his voice thoughtful. "About what's next. About the future. It's strange, you know? I've spent so much of my life focusing on the company, on what's coming next for the business, that I never really thought about what I wanted for myself. I've had all these dreams, but I never really let myself think about them." I sat down next to him, looking at the paper he had been staring at. It wasn't a list of business plans or strategies. It was a simple sketch of a house, a place that looked peaceful, surrounded by trees and open space. There was no doubt in my mind that it was his idea of a new beginning. "That looks beautiful," I said softly, admiring the drawing. "Is this what you want?" He nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about it a lot. About a new life. A place where I can just live. Not be caught up in everything I've built, but just be." I could hear the weight in his voice, the longing for something simpler. "It's amazing," I said with a smile. "I think it's exactly what you need." Grant looked at me for a long moment, as though weighing something in his mind. "Do you think it's possible?" he asked. "To start over, to really start fresh, after everything that's happened?" His question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. But then I realized that it wasn't just about him. It was about me, too. I had been part of his journey, but I had my own story to live, my own choices to make. "I think it's possible," I said quietly, meeting his gaze. "I think you can start over, Grant. You're already doing it. One step at a time." He smiled, a small but genuine smile, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a spark of the man he used to be, the man who believed in possibility. "Thank you, Anna," he said softly, "for everything. I don't think I could have come this far without you." I shook my head, my heart swelling with emotion. "You've done all the hard work, Grant. I'm just here to help you see it through." We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us taking in the quiet of the room. It wasn't uncomfortable, it was peaceful. Grant had made a choice, and while the road ahead wasn't clear, he was ready to walk it. The next few weeks passed quickly. Grant began to take more control of his own recovery, pushing himself in ways he hadn't before. He started making calls to some old friends, reconnecting with people from his past, and even started working on his new house project. It wasn't much yet, but it was a start. And for the first time in months, he seemed genuinely happy. He wasn't focused on the company or the past anymore. He was focused on his future, on what he wanted out of life, and on what he could build for himself. I continued to support him, to care for him, but there was something different now. It wasn't just about me being his nurse. It was about us both finding our way forward. One evening, Grant surprised me again. I had just finished my shift and was about to head home when he asked if I could stay for a while longer. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice serious but calm. I sat down across from him, waiting for him to speak. "I've been thinking a lot," he started, his eyes focused on mine. "About everything we've talked about, the future, starting over, and I realized something. I don't just want to start over for myself. I want to start over with you." My heart skipped a beat at his words, but I kept my composure. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grant took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't want to keep living in the past," he said quietly. "I've been so focused on what I've lost that I never stopped to see what I still have. And what I have now is you. I don't want to let that go." I felt a rush of emotions flood through me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. But then I realized that this wasn't just about him. It was about me, too. "I'm here, Grant," I said softly, my voice full of meaning. "And I'm not going anywhere." A quiet smile spread across his face, and for the first time, I saw a true peace in his eyes. "Then let's do this together," he said, his voice full of hope. "One step at a time." And in that moment, I knew that we were both ready for the next chapter. Whatever it held, we would face it together. The days following that conversation were filled with a quiet sense of peace between us. Grant had opened up, and so had I. For the first time in months, the tension that had hung between us began to fade. We had both made the decision to move forward, not just with the intention of rebuilding what was lost, but with the promise of creating something entirely new, something better. It was a slow journey, but we were making it together. As the weeks went by, Grant took more active steps toward reclaiming control of his life. He wasn't rushing to jump back into the business world, but he was slowly reconnecting with the things that mattered most to him. He had started spending more time outdoors, taking walks, and meeting people who weren't part of his corporate life. He found joy in small things: morning coffee, afternoon walks, and quiet evenings spent reading. It was a stark contrast to the man who had once lived and breathed his empire. His decision to step back from the company was still one of the hardest things he had ever done, but it had also allowed him to discover a side of life he had forgotten. A life outside of the constant pressure to succeed. I could see the changes in him each day. He was lighter, both in spirit and in mind. He still had moments of doubt, especially when his memories became cloudy or when he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility he had left behind, but he was no longer consumed by them. There was a new sense of calm in him. As for me, I too had found a sense of clarity in our shared journey. When I first came to the hospital, I had been focused on helping him recover, but as time passed, I realized I was healing in my own way. Watching Grant open up, taking care of him, and supporting him as he worked to rebuild his life, it made me reassess my own priorities, too. I had spent so much of my life focused on my job, on taking care of others, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I really wanted. Now, as I spent more time with Grant, I found myself asking those same questions. What did I want from my life? Where did I want to go from here? It was a strange but comforting realization. We were both on a journey, and while we had different paths, we were walking them together. One day, as I sat by his bedside, Grant looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Anna," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about something." I turned to him, sensing that this conversation might be different from the others. "What's on your mind?" I asked. He paused for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about the future," he said slowly. "About what comes next. Not just for me, but for both of us. You've been with me every step of the way, and I don't want to take that for granted. I don't want to keep living in the past. I want to build something with you. Something real." His words hung in the air, and I could feel my heart race. It wasn't the first time Grant had spoken about the future, but this time, it felt different. He wasn't talking about a business or a house or anything that could be measured in success. He was talking about us. I swallowed, unsure of how to respond. But the truth was, I felt the same way. I had been by his side throughout this journey, and I couldn't imagine my life without him. I had always been focused on the future, on what was next, but now, for the first time in a long while, I could see that the future didn't have to be a distant goal. It was right here, in this moment, with him. "I've been thinking about that too," I said softly, my voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside me. "I think we're both ready for something new. Something different." He looked at me, his expression full of hope. "So what do we do now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, a sense of calm washing over me as I looked at him. "We take it one day at a time. We keep moving forward, together." His eyes softened, and he smiled, the weight of everything he had been carrying lifting, if only for a moment. "Together," he repeated, as if the word itself held all the answers. Over the next few months, we both focused on building a new life. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when the weight of the past seemed to hang over us, when Grant would question if he was doing the right thing or if he was making the right choices. But we were learning to face those doubts together, to find strength in each other. Grant continued to recover, physically and emotionally, but now it was no longer just about healing from the accident. It was about creating something new, something better. He started looking into ways to get involved in the community, in projects that were close to his heart, and for the first time in years, he wasn't just focused on profit margins. He was focused on people. I, too, found my own direction. I took a step back from my role as his nurse and started to explore other opportunities in healthcare that would allow me to grow and make a difference. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I was ready for whatever came next. It was the beginning of something new for both of us. Something that was built on trust, on love, and on the understanding that life didn't have to be about control. Sometimes, the greatest strength came from letting go. One afternoon, we sat together, watching the sunset from the window of Grant's new home. The same home he had sketched all those weeks ago. It wasn't finished yet, but it was coming along. Slowly but surely, it was becoming a reality. And so were we. "It's strange," Grant said, his voice calm, "but I think this is what I've needed all along. A chance to start over, not just in the world, but inside myself." I nodded, resting my head against his shoulder. "I think we've both needed that," I said softly. "To start over, to build something new, and to do it together." He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I saw the man I had once admired so much, the man who had built something great, and now was building something even more important. A life. Our life. Together. It had been several months since Grant and I made the decision to build a new life together. The house he had sketched out, the one that had once seemed like nothing more than a dream on paper, was now beginning to take shape. Every day, it grew closer to becoming a reality. The walls were up, the roof was in place, And though there was still a long way to go, it was more than just a structure. It was a symbol of everything we had both worked toward. For Grant, it was a physical manifestation of his recovery, a testament to his strength and determination. For me, it was a reminder that we had come through something difficult and were now looking forward to something brighter. It wasn't just the house that was changing, we were changing too. Grant had found a new sense of purpose, one that wasn't tied to his business or the weight of his past. He had started volunteering at local community organizations, using his skills and experience to help others. It wasn't about making money anymore. It was about giving back. He was still the same man, in many ways, but his priorities had shifted. He was no longer consumed by the need to be in control of everything around him. As for me, I had begun to focus on my own growth as well. I had taken a leave from the hospital and decided to pursue further education. I wasn't entirely sure where it would lead, but I knew I needed to take the next step in my own life. Grant supported me in that decision, encouraging me to take the time to explore what I truly wanted. We had both made progress in our own ways, and it felt like we were finally living the life we had both longed for. One evening, after another long day of working on the house, we sat outside on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, and the sounds of the evening were peaceful, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was a moment of quiet, a rare but beautiful pause in the whirlwind of the past few months. Grant leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on his lap as he stared out at the view. "It's hard to believe how far we've come," he said, his voice low and contemplative. I nodded, my gaze also fixed on the horizon. "I know. Sometimes it feels like everything happened so fast. But we've both changed. We've grown." He glanced at me, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I never thought I'd get to this point. When I first woke up in the hospital, everything felt impossible. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't even know who I was anymore. But now I feel like I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to see who I am again." His words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about physical recovery for him. It was about rediscovering himself, about finding peace with who he was now, not who he had been. "I'm proud of you," I said softly. He looked at me, his expression warm. "I couldn't have done it without you," he replied. "You were there when I needed someone, when I couldn't even believe in myself. You helped me get here." I felt a lump form in my throat at his words. I hadn't expected gratitude from him, not like this. We had been through so much together, and I had done what anyone would have done. But hearing him say it, hearing him truly acknowledge everything I had done for him, meant more than I could put into words. "I'm just glad I could be here with you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "We've both been through a lot, and I'm just happy we're getting to a place where we can be happy again." There was a long silence between us as we both took in the weight of what had been said. It was a quiet moment, but it was one that spoke volumes. I knew we weren't done yet. We still had a long way to go, but we were on the right path, together. The house was coming along, and so was our life. We were no longer defined by what had happened in the past, by the pain or the mistakes. We were building something new, brick by brick. And for the first time, I felt like we had a solid foundation. The next morning, Grant and I went to the site to check on the progress of the house. The workers were busy, hammering away at the walls and laying down the floors. It was a mess of construction materials, but it felt like progress. I could see the vision coming to life, and it made me excited for what was to come. Grant looked at me as we walked through the space, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what we'll do when it's finished?" he asked. I smiled, taking in the space around us. "I think we'll just live," I said simply. "We'll fill it with our own stories, our own memories. It'll be a home." He nodded slowly, taking it all in. "A home," he repeated, as if the word itself held all the answers. We spent the rest of the afternoon there, walking through the rooms, imagining what each space would look like when it was finished. It wasn't about the house itself. It was about what it represented. It was about us, taking that first step toward the life we had always wanted. We didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time, we were no longer afraid to find out. And that was all that mattered. It had been several months since we had begun the process of rebuilding not just the house, but our lives. Grant and I had settled into a rhythm, a quiet harmony that was both comforting and liberating. Each day, we worked on the house together, making decisions, seeing the transformation take place, brick by brick. just as we were transforming ourselves. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything we were building together. I had come to see this place as more than just walls and a roof. It was a new chapter in both of our lives, a fresh start we had both longed for. Grant was still figuring out what his life beyond the company looked like, but he was starting to embrace it, slowly but surely. He had spent so many years consumed by the demands of his business that the simple pleasures of life, time spent outdoors, quiet evenings at home, felt almost foreign to him. But I could see the change in him. He was learning how to appreciate the quiet moments. We had long conversations about the future, what we wanted, where we saw ourselves in 5, 10 years. The more we talked, the more it became clear that we both wanted the same thing: peace, happiness, and a life that wasn't dictated by expectations or past mistakes. There were still moments when the past crept in, when Grant would question his decisions or doubt whether he had made the right choice stepping away from the company. On those days, I reminded him of how far he had come, of how much he had already accomplished in rediscovering himself. It wasn't about being the man he once was. It was about becoming the person he was meant to be. We were sitting together on the porch one evening, watching the sunset as we had so many times before. The air was cooler now, and the first signs of autumn were beginning to show in the changing leaves. There was a sense of calm in the air, a feeling that things were finally settling into place. Grant turned to me, his face illuminated by the soft light of the setting sun. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low and contemplative, "about the house, about what it represents." I looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "When I first started thinking about building this place, it was just a way to escape everything that had happened. But now I realize it's more than that. It's a symbol of starting over. A place where we can be ourselves. A place where we can truly live." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had always seen the house as a symbol of our future, but hearing him talk about it like this made it feel even more real. This wasn't just about creating a new home. It was about creating a new life. A life that was ours, free from the constraints of the past. I nodded slowly, my heart full of emotion. "It's beautiful, Grant. I think it's exactly what we need. A fresh start, together." He smiled at me, his eyes reflecting the same understanding. "Together," he repeated, his voice filled with meaning. It was a word that carried so much weight, so much promise. In that moment, I realized how far we had come, and how much we had built, not just in terms of the house, but in terms of our relationship, our trust, and our future. A few weeks later, the house was finally nearing completion. The last touches were being added: paint on the walls, landscaping in the yard, small details that turned the place into a true home. We spent hours together, making decisions about every little thing, from the color of the kitchen cabinets to the placement of furniture in the living room. It was a time of joy and anticipation, but also of reflection. Every time we walked through the house, I could see the pride in Grant's eyes. He had been through so much, and now he was finally building something for himself, for us. It wasn't just about the physical structure. It was about the life that was being built inside it. We had made it through the hardest parts, and now we were looking forward to the future with hope. One afternoon, we stood in the middle of what would soon be the living room, looking out at the view through the large windows. The house was finally starting to feel like a home, and I could feel the excitement building inside me. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" I asked, my voice filled with wonder. "From where we started to this?" Grant turned to me, a smile spreading across his face. "I think about it every day," he said. "But not just the house. I think about how much we've changed, about how much we've both grown. This house is just the beginning." I looked at him, my heart swelling with emotion. "I never could have imagined it," I said quietly. "How far we would come, how much we would change. But I'm so glad we did." He reached out and took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "I am too," he said. "We've been through so much together, and we've come out stronger for it. We're not the same people we were when this all started. We're better." And in that moment, I knew he was right. We weren't the same people, and that was okay. We had both changed in ways we couldn't have predicted, but we had done it together. We had faced the darkest moments, the doubts, and the fears, and come out stronger on the other side. This house, this new life we were building, it was a reflection of everything we had been through and everything we had become. It wasn't just a place to live. It was a symbol of our journey, our love, and our future. And together, We were ready to start the next chapter. The days that followed were filled with excitement and anticipation. The house was finally completed, and it felt like we had achieved something monumental together. We had not only built a home, but had rebuilt our lives from the ground up. The walls and rooms were filled with memories and moments that we had shared along the way. What once seemed like an impossible task had now become our sanctuary, a place where we could truly be ourselves. Grant had never been one for sentimentality, but even he couldn't help but smile as we stood together in the center of the living room, taking in the view of the mountains beyond the window. It was a view he had always dreamed of, but never thought would be possible. "I can't believe we did it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. I looked at him, taking in the transformation not only of the house but of him. He had come so far. "It's more than just the house, isn't it?" I replied, my voice soft. "It's everything we've worked for." He nodded, his eyes meeting mine. "I think this is what it's all been about. Not the company, not the fame, but this. This is what really matters." I could see the weight lift from his shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, I saw him truly at peace. It wasn't about the empire he had built or the mistakes he had made along the way. It was about the life he was creating now. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges to face, but we were ready for them. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of settling in. We decorated the house, choosing pieces that reflected who we were now. We filled the space with laughter, shared meals, and quiet moments, content in each other's company. The house didn't feel like a project anymore. It felt like home. It was everything we had hoped for and more. But as much as we had created a beautiful home, the world outside was still there, waiting for us. Grant's family, who had been distant during his recovery, started reaching out more. They had seen the changes in him, and it was clear they wanted to be part of his life again. It wasn't easy, especially for Grant. He was still working through his feelings of betrayal and abandonment, but he had come a long way. He was learning that rebuilding wasn't just about physical things, it was about relationships, too. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, the phone rang. It was his sister, Elizabeth. Grant hesitated before answering. I could see the anxiety in his eyes, the old habits of distance and mistrust surfacing. "It's okay," I said gently, placing a hand on his. "Take your time. It's just a conversation." He nodded, taking a deep breath before answering the phone. I sat quietly, listening as he spoke to his sister. It wasn't an easy conversation. He spoke of the past, the hurt, and the distance that had grown between them. But I could hear the shift in his voice, the softness that had replaced the anger. He wasn't the man he had been before the accident. He was someone new, someone who was willing to forgive, to move forward. When the conversation ended, Grant set the phone down, his expression mixed. "That was harder than I thought it would be," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I think it was necessary. I needed to say those things, and she needed to hear them." I smiled softly, proud of him. "You did the right thing," I said. "It's a step forward. In healing, in rebuilding your relationships." He looked at me, his gaze softening. "I'm not sure where things will go from here, but I feel better. I feel like I've finally closed that chapter." "You have," I said. "And now you get to decide what the next chapter looks like. It's up to you." Over the following months, we continued to rebuild not just the house, but our lives. Grant's relationship with his family began to improve, though it wasn't without its challenges. They were still learning how to relate to the new Grant, the man who had let go of the need for control, the man who was learning to live in the moment. But they were trying. And for Grant, that was enough. I too found my own path. I had started working with a local healthcare organization, focusing on community care, something I had always been passionate about. It was a new chapter for me as well, one that allowed me to grow both personally and professionally. We were both building the futures we had always wanted, but never dared to pursue. It wasn't perfect, and there were still days of doubt, of old fears creeping back in. But we faced them together, knowing that we had built something strong, something worth holding on to. One afternoon, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, Grant turned to me. "I never thought I'd get here," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "I never thought I'd be happy again, not like this. But now, I don't want anything more." I smiled, leaning into him. "I know. I don't think either of us could have imagined it. But here we are." He nodded, his eyes soft. "And I'm exactly where I need to be. With you. In this house. In this life." And in that moment, I realized that we had both found something truly precious. Not just the house, not just the life we had built, but each other. We had rebuilt everything from the ground up, and now, we were finally home. Together. It had been several months since we had truly begun to settle into our new life, and things were looking brighter with each passing day. The house, which had once seemed like a distant dream, was now our home, a space that felt entirely ours, filled with memories, laughter, and quiet moments. Every time I looked around, I was reminded of how far we had come. What had once been broken and uncertain was now something solid, something we could both stand on. For Grant, it wasn't just about the physical recovery anymore. It was about learning to live a life that wasn't defined by the past. He had gone through so much, the loss, the pressure, the isolation, but he was finding joy in the small things. In the mornings, we would sit on the porch, sipping our coffee and watching the sunrise, a ritual that had become our grounding. He had started reconnecting with friends, people from his past who had supported him long before the accident. It wasn't always easy for him, but he was making an effort, and that was all I could ask for. As for me, I had found my own way too. I had thrown myself into my work at the community healthcare center, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. It was a different kind of challenge, one that brought me closer to the people I was helping and closer to myself. The job gave me the space to grow, both personally and professionally. I realized that while I had always cared deeply for others, I had also needed to care for myself. That's what the last few months had taught me. How to balance giving with receiving, how to nurture both others and myself. There were moments when we would share the silence of the evenings, just being present with each other. Our conversations had shifted from uncertainty to hope, from healing to planning. What was next for us? What would we build together now that we had the space to dream? One night, as we sat on the couch in the living room, the fire crackling softly in the background, Grant turned to me, his eyes soft with thought. "You know, I've been thinking about something," he began. "We've made it this far, and it feels like we've finally found a rhythm. But I want more. I want to make something that will last, not just for us, but for the people around us. I want to create something that gives back. A place where people can heal, just like I did. A place for the community." I looked at him, feeling the sincerity in his words. "You're already doing that," I said, my voice full of pride. "You've made a difference in so many ways, just by being here, by living the way you are now. People can see that change in you. They feel it." He nodded, but there was a quiet determination in his eyes. "I know, but I want to do more. I've spent my life building an empire, but now I want to build something that matters. Something that helps others, not just myself." His words were so genuine, so filled with purpose, that I couldn't help but smile. "I think that's exactly what you should do," I said, leaning closer to him. "We have everything we need right here. We have this home, our life together. Why not use what we've learned to make a difference? Maybe we could start a foundation," he said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "Something that supports healthcare initiatives, something that helps people who need it. I've always had the resources to make an impact, but now I want to make sure it's in the right way." I sat back, taking in the weight of what he was suggesting. A foundation. It was a big idea, but it was a good one. It was everything Grant had wanted to do, but never had the time for. And now, it felt like the right moment to bring it to life. "I think that's a beautiful idea," I said quietly. "And I think it's exactly the kind of work that would make both of us proud." "It wouldn't just be for us," Grant continued. "It would be for everyone who's been through what I've been through. For people who feel like they're lost, who don't know where to turn. I want to give them the chance to find their way back, just like I did." The conversation lingered in the air between us, not heavy but hopeful. It wasn't a plan yet, not fully, but it felt like the start of something important. A new purpose, something we could pour ourselves into. Something that wasn't just about us, but about the world around us. That night, as I lay in bed beside Grant, I realized just how much had changed. We had both started from places of uncertainty, from brokenness, but now we had a vision of what we could create, not just for ourselves, but for others. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of discussions and plans. We reached out to people who could help us make the foundation a reality: lawyers, financial advisors, and friends who had experience in the nonprofit world. We spent hours talking, refining our goals, and shaping the vision for what we wanted to build. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming. But we both knew this was the path forward. We were no longer just two people trying to rebuild a life after tragedy. We were people with a mission, with a purpose beyond ourselves. One afternoon, we sat down to put the final touches on the foundation's mission statement. As we read over the words, Grant looked at me, his expression serious. "Are we ready for this?" he asked. I smiled and took his hand. "We've been ready for a long time," I said softly. "We've just had to find the right way to show it." And in that moment, I knew that we weren't just building a house, or a foundation, or a future. We were building a legacy of hope, healing, and love. We had both faced the hardest parts of our lives, and now, we were ready to help others do the same. Together, months passed, and the foundation of the charity we had started began to take shape. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when we both felt overwhelmed by the scale of what we were trying to accomplish. But we pushed forward because we believed in it. We believed in the change we could make, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of others. We spent countless hours brainstorming, meeting with professionals, and figuring out the best way to create the most impact. It wasn't just about giving money. It was about creating a system, a community of support, a place where people could come for help and not just financial assistance, but guidance, resources, and hope. The work was exhausting, but it was also incredibly fulfilling. Grant was more involved than ever, using his experience and resources to help make the vision a reality. He wasn't the same man he had been before the accident. He wasn't driven by the need to control everything. Now, he was driven by a deeper purpose, a desire to make a real difference in the world. For the first time in a long time, I saw him truly at peace with himself. We had learned the hard way that life wasn't about being perfect or having everything figured out. It was about resilience, about picking yourself up when everything falls apart, and about giving back to others when you've been given a second chance. The house, which had once symbolized the rebuilding of our own lives, now became a symbol of what we were building for others. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a place of healing. Every room, every wall, every small corner of the space reminded us of the journey we had gone through together. It wasn't about escaping the past. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and using it to shape the future. That was the same spirit we poured into our charity. We didn't have all the answers, but we had the passion to try. One evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, we sat together in the living room, a rare moment of quiet. The sun had set, and the soft glow of the lamp illuminated the space around us. It felt like home, warm, comforting, and full of promise. Grant sat beside me, his eyes thoughtful. "I've been thinking about how far we've come," he said, his voice low but filled with meaning. I smiled and looked at him. "I know," I said softly. "Sometimes it still feels like a dream. But we've made it happen." He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "I never thought I would get to this place," he said quietly. "I didn't think I could rebuild, not just the house, but my life. But now I feel like I've found something that's bigger than just me. I feel like I'm part of something that matters." I reached out and took his hand, my heart swelling with pride. "You've always mattered, Grant. You just needed to realize it. And now, look at everything you've built. You've built something that's going to change lives." He smiled, a small but genuine smile, his fingers tightening around mine. "It's not just me," he said. "It's us. Together, we've built something that's going to help people, change lives. I couldn't have done it without you." I felt a lump form in my throat, but I smiled back at him. "I've always been here for you, Grant," I said. "And I always will be." We sat in silence for a while, letting the weight of our conversation settle. It was hard to believe how far we had come, from the days of uncertainty and pain to this moment of clarity, of hope. We had both changed, but it felt like we had changed for the better. The path ahead was still uncertain. We didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, we felt ready to face it. We were building something meaningful, not just for ourselves, but for others, too. And that made everything we had been through worth it. The next step for us was the grand opening of the foundation, the culmination of all our hard work and planning. We had invited friends, colleagues, and supporters to join us in celebrating what we had created. It wasn't just a celebration of our success, but a celebration of hope, the hope that we could make a difference. As the event approached, Grant and I spent hours finalizing the details, making sure everything was perfect. But it wasn't about the details. It was about the bigger picture. It was about what we had built, the lives we had touched, and the ones we would touch in the future. On the night of the event, the space was filled with people, friends, supporters, and people who believed in what we were doing. Grant stood beside me, his hand resting gently on my back. He was nervous, but there was a sense of pride in his eyes, too. "I can't believe we're here," he said quietly, looking out at the crowd. "I never thought it would come to this. But it's real now. It's happening." I smiled, feeling the same sense of amazement. "It's just the beginning," I said softly. And it was. The opening was a success, but that was only the start. The real work was just beginning, building relationships, helping those in need, and continuing to grow. But we were ready for it. Together, we were stronger than ever. We had built a future, a life, a purpose, and it was only going to get better from here. The months after the grand opening of the foundation passed in a blur of activity, growth, and unexpected challenges. What we had started with such hope and determination was now a growing entity, impacting more lives than we had imagined. Grant, ever the visionary, threw himself into the work, overseeing operations, connecting with donors, and ensuring the foundation was headed in the right direction. But there were still moments when he questioned whether he was doing enough, or if the weight of his past would eventually catch up with him. I saw it in the way he would sometimes sit alone in the evenings, staring out at the world from our porch, lost in thought. I could tell he was still working through the tension between who he had been and who he was becoming. He had made peace with so much, but the scars of the past, the feeling of being disconnected from his family and his former world, still lingered in quiet moments. But despite these doubts, he had found something that gave him purpose again, something greater than himself. It wasn't about building an empire anymore. It was about helping others find their own way through the challenges they faced. His decision to step away from the company, to build the foundation, had shifted his focus entirely. And for the first time in a long while, I saw him at peace with his choices. I had my own moments of self-doubt, too. The work I was doing at the healthcare center, helping people in need, was incredibly fulfilling, but there were days when I questioned whether I was doing enough or whether I had fully healed from my own past. I had spent so much of my life focused on others, always putting them before myself, that I realized I had neglected my own healing at times. But in this new chapter of our lives, I started to recognize the importance of my own growth. We had both made progress, but it was clear that the next step wasn't just about the work we were doing. It was about learning to find balance, to take care of ourselves while caring for others. One afternoon, we stood in the foundation's office, looking over the latest report. The numbers were growing, and we had already begun seeing the positive changes we had hoped for in the community. People were coming forward, sharing their stories, seeking help, and finding hope. It was overwhelming, in the best possible way. But as we discussed the next phase of the foundation's expansion, I could sense a change in Grant. There was a new energy in him, a renewed sense of purpose. "We've done so much already," he said, looking at the reports in front of us. "But there's more to be done. I've realized something recently. All the work we're doing, all the lives we're helping, it's not enough to just fix things on the surface. We need to help people build the tools they need to stand on their own, to thrive, not just survive." I watched him closely, recognizing that this was more than just a business decision. It was an evolution. The man who had once sought control, who had built everything with his own hands, was now focused on empowering others to do the same. "That's exactly what we've been working towards," I said softly. "But it's going to take time. It's not just about giving help. It's about creating opportunities for long-term change." He smiled, the weight of his past lifting just a little bit more. "We've got the resources now. We've built the foundation, and now it's time to build the future. Not just for us, but for everyone we can reach." That afternoon, we made a decision. We would focus more on education and empowerment. We would provide mentorship programs, job training, and create a network of support that would help people regain control of their lives in ways that went beyond just immediate relief. The more we spoke, the more I realized how far Grant had come. He had embraced the idea of building something sustainable, something that wasn't dependent on him or his past, but on the community itself. The thought of providing opportunities for others to thrive, not just survive, was exactly what he had been searching for. We were no longer looking at the world through the lens of what we had lost. We were focused on what we could give, what we could create together. And for the first time, I realized that we had truly found our purpose. We weren't just giving back to the world. We were helping to change it, one person at a time. The next few months were a whirlwind of meetings, new initiatives, and planning. We worked tirelessly, but it was no longer the exhausting work of trying to fix everything. It was the rewarding work of building something meaningful. There were still challenges, of course. Running a foundation wasn't easy. But every time we hit a roadblock, we faced it together. We had learned how to handle adversity, how to lean on each other, and how to find strength in the work we were doing. As the foundation continued to grow, we began to see the impact it was having. The people who came to us for help were finding new opportunities, new hope, and a sense of purpose they had never thought possible. And in turn, we found ourselves giving back in ways we had never imagined. It wasn't just the foundation that was thriving. We were thriving too. Together, we had created something that was bigger than either of us could have done alone. It was a testament to what we had built together, the life, the foundation, the future. And for the first time in a long time, I felt confident that we were on the right path. It wasn't always going to be easy, but we had everything we needed to make a difference, to continue growing, and to build the life we both wanted. We had built something real. And that, in the end, was the most important thing. The weeks continued to slip by as we moved forward with our mission. Every day felt like a new step, a new opportunity to build on what we had started. Our foundation was growing, and with it, our impact. We were no longer just helping a handful of people. We were reaching entire communities. It was overwhelming at times, but it was also incredibly rewarding. The more we gave, the more we saw the ripple effects of our work. People were finding their own paths, their own ways to rebuild, just like we had done. We had created something bigger than ourselves, something that had the power to change lives. Grant, for all his quiet introspection, had become an even stronger presence in the foundation. He was involved in every aspect, planning, outreach, meeting with other organizations, and he did it all with a sense of purpose that I hadn't seen in him before. I watched him with admiration as he navigated this new world. He had always been someone who thrived on control, but now, he was letting go. He was trusting others to handle things, trusting in the power of collaboration. It wasn't always easy for him. There were days when the weight of everything we were doing felt too much, when his doubts would resurface. But he never let it stop him. He kept moving forward. There were moments when I would catch him in a quiet moment, lost in thought, looking out at the horizon from our porch, just like he used to do when he was unsure of his future. But now, there was a peacefulness in his expression, a calmness I hadn't seen before. It was as if he had finally accepted that life didn't need to be perfect for it to be meaningful. It just needed to be lived. I, too, was growing in ways I hadn't expected. At first, the idea of leaving my job at the healthcare center to fully dedicate myself to the foundation had been a difficult decision. I had always prided myself on my career, on helping people through my work in healthcare. But the more we worked on the foundation, the more I realized that this was my new calling. This wasn't just about helping individuals. It was about creating systemic change, about using our resources to make a difference on a larger scale. The work we were doing together was giving me a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just Grant's partner anymore. I was part of something bigger, something that could touch more lives than I could have ever imagined. Together, we were building something that would outlast us, something that would make a difference long after we were gone. But despite the progress, there were still challenges to face. The foundation was growing rapidly, and with that growth came new obstacles. There were moments when we found ourselves at odds on how to proceed. There were disagreements, differing opinions on priorities, and moments when we questioned whether we were moving in the right direction. But through it all, we never lost sight of why we started. We had built this foundation on trust, on love, and on the desire to help others. That was the guiding principle that kept us going, even when things got tough. One evening, as we were working late in the office, a small disagreement turned into a conversation that lasted well into the night. It wasn't a fight, but it was a moment of tension, one where we had to stop and really listen to each other. "I know you want to do everything, but we can't rush it all," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We have to focus on what's most important right now, on what we can do well. We can't take on everything at once." Grant looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I just want to make the biggest impact we can." I want to see this foundation succeed. I nodded, understanding. We're already making an impact. But success isn't just about doing everything at once. It's about doing the right things at the right time. We have to pace ourselves. There was silence between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of clarity, a realization that we were both driven by the same goal, but had different ideas of how to get there. You're right, he finally said. I've been so focused on moving fast that I haven't been paying attention to the bigger picture. We have to make sure we're building something sustainable, not just rushing ahead. I smiled softly, proud of him for recognizing that. We'll get there, I said gently. We just have to keep working together, step by step. From that conversation, things began to shift. We took a step back and reevaluated our priorities. We focused on creating sustainable partnerships with other organizations, expanding our reach, and ensuring that we were offering meaningful support. We didn't need to do everything at once. We needed to make sure we were doing it right. That shift in perspective changed everything. We were no longer rushing to prove something. We were moving forward with purpose, with patience, and with a sense of direction that felt more aligned with what we wanted to achieve. As the months went by, the foundation continued to grow, and so did we. The work was hard, but it was rewarding. We had moments of doubt, of course, but we never let them define us. Instead, we let those moments become opportunities for growth. We were learning how to navigate this new chapter of our lives, together. One evening, as we walked through the yard of the house, I looked at Grant, and I could see the peace in his eyes. It was the kind of peace that came from knowing you were doing the right thing, from seeing the impact of your work, and from knowing that you were exactly where you were meant to be. We're really doing it, I said softly, looking around at the life we had built. Together. He smiled, his arm around my shoulders as we walked toward the house. Yeah, we are, he said, his voice full of warmth. And I wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. In that moment, I realized that we had built more than just a home, more than just a foundation. We had built a future, our future, one that was filled with purpose, with love, and with the promise of all the good we could do in the world. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had truly found our place in the world. The days grew shorter as the seasons changed, and with each passing moment, the foundation that Grant and I had built, both in our personal lives and through our charitable work, continued to grow stronger. The foundation, which had started as a simple idea between two people determined to make a difference, was now becoming an institution, impacting the lives of many. It was humbling to see how far we had come since the early days of uncertainty and self-doubt. The house, once an empty shell, was now a place full of life, not just ours but of so many who had found comfort and hope through the work we were doing. But while the foundation flourished, there were moments when both Grant and I felt the weight of everything we had undertaken. It wasn't always easy to balance our ambitions with the reality of our emotional and personal journeys. Grant was still learning how to manage the past, how to reconcile the person he had been with the man he was becoming. Though he had found peace in his work, he still had moments where the old fears crept in, where the weight of his former life tried to reclaim him. On those days, I did my best to remind him how far he had come. We had both come a long way. He, from a place of control and loneliness, and I, from a place of self-doubt and sacrifice. Together, we were learning to live a life that wasn't built on the expectations of others, but on our own values, our own definition of success. One afternoon, as we sat together in the office of the foundation, going over the latest reports and strategies, I noticed Grant's expression had shifted. He had become quiet, lost in thought, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping the table. I set the papers down and leaned forward, watching him carefully. "Grant, what's on your mind?" I asked gently. He sighed deeply, rubbing his hands over his face. "I've been thinking about everything we're doing," he began, his voice low. "The foundation, the impact we're making, but there's still so much more I feel we need to do. I can't help but wonder if we're doing enough, if we're moving fast enough." I studied his face, knowing that beneath his words was the same fear he had battled for so long, the fear of not being enough. "Grant, look at how far we've come," I said softly. "You've already made such a difference. We've created something that's already changing lives. But it's okay to take a step back, to pace ourselves. We don't have to do everything all at once." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of uncertainty and determination. I know, but I still feel like I'm racing against time. Like there's something more I'm meant to do, and I don't know if I'm doing it the right way. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his, offering him the comfort he needed without needing to say anything more. You're doing it the right way, Grant. You're leading with your heart. And that's all we can do. He smiled faintly, but the relief in his eyes was immediate. It was in moments like this that I realized just how much we had grown. Our lives had been a series of struggles, but through each struggle, we had found strength in each other. I don't know where I'd be without you, he said quietly. You've helped me see things differently, given me the courage to let go of what I thought I needed to control. I don't think I would have been able to get to this point without you. I squeezed his hand and smiled. We've both helped each other get here. We're in this together, and that's what matters. As the days passed, we continued to make progress on our foundation's initiatives. We expanded our outreach programs, focusing on providing support to people who were going through similar struggles to the ones we had faced. We connected with other organizations, collaborating to create a network of resources that would help individuals not only survive but thrive. It was a lot of work, and there were still moments when we were both overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. But with each success, with each person who found hope through our efforts, we knew we were on the right path. The work wasn't just about giving money or resources. It was about empowering people to take control of their lives, to find their own way, just as we had done. It wasn't easy, and we still faced setbacks. There were times when the stress of managing the foundation, combined with our personal lives, felt too much to handle. But even in those moments, we held on to what we had learned through our journey together, that as long as we supported each other, we could face anything. One evening, after a long day of meetings and calls, Grant and I sat together on the back porch of our house. The air was cool, and the stars were beginning to appear overhead. The quiet was peaceful, a stark contrast to the hectic pace of our days. Grant leaned back in his chair, staring up at the sky. Do you ever think about where we started? He asked quietly. I looked at him, taking in the sense of peace that had settled over him in the last few months. Every day, I said softly. We've come so far, and yet, it still feels like it's just the beginning. He smiled and nodded, his gaze shifting back to the stars. I never thought we'd get here, he said, his voice filled with awe. But here we are, together. I reached out, taking his hand in mine. And we're not stopping now, I said. There's so much more we can do. For each other, for the people we're helping, for the future we're building. He squeezed my hand, his smile widening. Together, he repeated, and in that moment, I knew that no matter what came next, we would face it side by side. We had built something incredible, and we weren't done yet. Together, we would continue to create a future that was full of purpose, love, and impact. As the seasons changed, Grant and I continued our work with the foundation, now fully immersed in a mission we had never imagined would come to fruition in such a powerful way. The early days of uncertainty and the overwhelming scope of the project seemed so far behind us now. We had carved out a path not just for ourselves, but for others to follow, and the journey felt as rewarding as it was transformative. Our house, the one we had spent months designing and rebuilding, had become a reflection of our new life together, and it felt more like a home with each passing day. It wasn't just the physical space that had changed, it was the way we had learned to live within it, the way we had learned to trust each other and our instincts. We were no longer consumed by the pressure of needing to be perfect or to succeed on someone else's terms. We had created a life that worked for us, and the foundation had become the heartbeat of our shared vision for the future. We weren't just building for ourselves anymore. We were building for something far bigger. As we watched the impact of our work grow, we were reminded that every step of the way had been worth it. The foundation had transformed from a small local initiative to a thriving organization, touching lives in ways we never thought possible. We received messages from people we had helped, their words full of gratitude and hope. These were the moments that kept us going, that reminded us of why we did this work in the first place. The foundation had provided people with opportunities to change their lives, and that felt like the most profound success. We had made it through the storm, and now, we were watching the fruits of our labor begin to blossom. But there were still hurdles to overcome. There were still nights when the weight of the responsibility felt heavy. Grant and I often found ourselves sitting together in silence, looking out at the stars, talking about the future and what we hoped to accomplish next. We had learned that there would always be challenges ahead, but that didn't mean we weren't equipped to face them. What mattered was that we had each other. The foundation was more than just a cause. It had become our shared purpose, a place where we could channel our energy and passion into something meaningful. We continued to expand the programs we offered, partnering with more organizations and creating new initiatives that could help those who were struggling the most. The dream we had once envisioned, to make a difference in the world, had become a reality. But there was still more to do. With every success came the realization that the work was never truly finished. We were learning to embrace the ebb and flow of progress, understanding that the road to change was long but worth it. The key was to never lose sight of why we were doing it, to never lose sight of the people we were helping, and to always keep moving forward. It was on one of those quiet nights that we finally talked about the future in a way we hadn't before. We were sitting on the porch, the cool night air wrapping around us, as Grant spoke with a rare sense of resolve. "You know," he said softly, "when I first started all this, I didn't know what I was really looking for. I thought success was about having everything under control, about building something bigger than myself. But now, I see it differently. It's not about control. It's about connection. It's about people. It's about making sure that the work we're doing reaches the hearts of those who need it most. That's the legacy I want to leave." I turned to him, my heart swelling with pride. "You're already leaving that legacy," I said. "The foundation is a testament to everything you've become, everything we've become together. We've done something that matters." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the quiet understanding that had developed between us over the years. "It's not just about what we've built, it's about who we've become along the way. We've learned to trust each other, to listen, to grow together. And that's what makes it all worth it." I squeezed his hand, feeling the truth in his words. We had been through so much, and in many ways, we had been tested in ways we never expected. But here we were, standing side by side, ready for whatever the future held. We had created something meaningful. We had found purpose. And we had each other. It was then that I realized that this was the final chapter of our journey, a journey that had brought us from loss to discovery, from doubt to certainty. We had faced the darkest moments and emerged stronger, more united, and more determined than ever to make a difference. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: we were ready for it. Together, we had built something that was more than just a house, more than just a foundation. We had built a life filled with meaning, with love, and with the promise of a brighter tomorrow. And as we looked ahead, we knew that whatever came next, we would face it hand in hand, knowing that the work we were doing was changing lives, creating hope, and leaving a legacy that would last long after we were gone. Our journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. In this inspiring millionaire story, a man's journey from wealth to loss, and ultimately to purpose, shows that true success is not just about material gain, but about rebuilding one's life and giving back to others. Follow the story of how an ambitious man, once consumed by his empire, finds peace and a renewed sense of purpose after a life-changing event. This millionaire story unfolds as he steps away from his controlling nature, learns to trust, and begins making a lasting impact on his community. His journey of rediscovery and redemption highlights that even the most successful individuals can find fulfillment through helping others. The foundation he builds becomes a platform for not just helping people survive, but thrive, reflecting the transformative power of second chances. This millionaire story showcases how a focus on personal growth, relationships, and giving back leads to a deeper sense of purpose. The man's realization that true legacy is not built on wealth, but on the lives touched, is a powerful reminder that we all have the potential to impact the world in profound ways. His shift from striving for control to building something that can help others creates a legacy that will endure far beyond his own success. This millionaire story proves that the real wealth is found in the connections we build, the lives we change, and the way we leave the world a better place than we found it.